Hey everyone, welcome back to Swift Fundamentals. Today we will be looking at integers and their properties as well as how we can use them in code. So to begin, make sure we have a playground open. I've gone ahead and named this one integer, and we can get started. We've seen variables and set them to integers, but if you need to see that again, well, we can write a var, then some kind of name, so my first int, and then set it to some integer. As a reminder, an integer, as defined in math, is any number, any whole number that goes from a negative infinity to positive infinity. There are no decimals. But in computers, there has to be a max and min. So we can check out what the maximum and minimum number is right now through a property called int.max and int.min. And I can show you how those work. So let's say we have max, and we can write max, and let's say min, and we'll write that out as min. Now these are the biggest and smallest number that you can possibly have in our computer. And this is a memory thing, but suffice to say, this is what the extent of our max and mins are. Now, obviously we have a lot of numbers to work with, so you really don't have to be super concerned with these things, but it is good to know. So integers go essentially from here, from this positive number all the way down to the negative number. Later on, we will see something called an unsigned integer, which basically means that it's not negative, it's simply positive, and the number you can go up to is much bigger. But for your normal use cases, you will probably always default to just regular ints and work with those. Now, the next thing we need to see is how do we interact with these integers? Well, we have our integer operations, some of which will be very familiar, and then others have some unique quirks. So let's start with a very common addition. Now with this one, it's simply what you expect. So let's say var my sum equal, and let's do some addition. So 5, you've seen the symbol before, plus 6, and you get the result of 11. Here we are adding these two numbers. Now the next one is another familiar one, subtraction. And let's say my var my difference equals 7 minus 10, 7 minus, I guess 19, and we get negative 12. This to show you that integers can definitely go into the negative numbers. Awesome, so the next one is multiplication, and for that one we will write var, well, let me just title it multiplication, and for this one we write var my product equals, and then you write whatever number you want, let's say 2, and we don't use x, we use this asterisk, and then we write whatever number we want, let's say 5. So let's run this, and we see that we get 10. Pretty much these work as we expect them to. However, the next two, they work a little different with some quirks. So you're probably thinking, okay, well, the next one has to be division, and you're right. So for that, we will write division, and here we go. Let's say let result equal, let's say 6, and for the division operator, what we use is a forward slash. So we write forward slash, let's say 2, and let's run this. Now, great. We get what we expect, right? So 6 divided by 2 is 3, because 2 times 3 gives you 6. Pretty much what we expect. However, there is one thing that you need to know. Let's say that we have let result 2, and let's say you had a number like 5, and you divide that by 2. Think about what you would get, and let's see what we actually get. We get 2. And that's because the real answer would basically be 2.5. But due to the fact that we have integers, what ends up happening is we only get back whatever whole numbers we have. So 2.5 becomes 2 because the 0.5 gets dropped. something that you should definitely keep in mind whenever you're working with integers and do any sort of division. Sometimes it actually works out for us. We're maybe not interested in decimals, but other times we definitely want it, and we need to keep that in our mind at all times. Now, something about being type safe. If we had let result 3, for example, and we do something like 3 times 4.5, we see we get 13.5. Essentially, what's happening in the background is it's treating this 3 as a 3.0 because Swift likes to be strongly typed, and that means that you cannot mix integers and doubles as you'd like. It's just doing some inference in the background to figure out, okay, well, I think you meant 3.0 instead. If we check and we option click our variables, we see that this is a double and this right here is an int, along with all the other ones we've done. So let's get this out since it doesn't apply. Great. So let's move on to our last operator. Now this one can be a little weird, but it becomes very useful, especially when you get those tricky even and odd questions. So it's definitely good to become familiar with it. It ends up being very, very useful in code. So how does it work? Well, let's say we have let result 3, and let's say we do 5 again, but this time let's do modulo 2 and see what we get. So we see here we get 1. And that's because what it does is that it goes, okay, well, when you divide 5 and 2, you get some result, but then there's a remainder. And whatever that remainder is, it throws it back as 1, which is very useful because check this out. Let result 4, let result 4 equal 4 modulo 2. And you check that, and we get 0. Let's try one more. I'm just going to copy and paste this to make this faster. Let's set this to 5 since we can't redeclare. And now let's set this to 7. We get 1. And to really phone it in, let's just run it one more time with 6, and this one 6 as well. What do we get? We get 0. Now this is why modulo is so great for those even and odds. Because as you can see, when you take modulo 2 of a number, if it's positive, then you're going to get 0 because it goes evenly into it, which is very great when we do checks for even and odd. So it's just something to keep in mind, and I will bring that up later when we learn how to make those checks. The last thing we will look at is operator shorthand. These are operators that allow us to do quick math to a given variable. So let's say we start off with var test equals 5. The first one is we will call our variable and then write plus equals, and let's say 3. Let's then check what test is and see what we get. Well, as we can see, what this does is that it takes whatever the value of test is and adds on to it 3, whatever number we put on the right hand side. And so now test changes from 5 to 8. So after line 22, anytime we call test, what we will be getting is an 8. Okay? So let's keep going. So just like we can do it with addition, we can do it with subtraction. So let's say we now do minus equals, and we get 6. So we had 5, then we added 3, so test now equals 8. And then we took test at 8 and minus 2, and so we get 6. Okay? And we can do that for the other ones. So we can do test, multiplication, so multiply equals, we do 2. So think about what you should get at this point. If you guessed 12, then you were right, because it turned it into 8, then it turned it into 6, and then test at this point is 6. So 6 times 2 is 12, and now test becomes 12. Okay? And that's because of this equal signs, right? So it says take this operator, do whatever it is, and then whatever your variable on the left-hand side is, take that value now. Okay? which is different from something like var new test and then equaling that from test times 2, right? So if you look at this, what would you expect new test to be? Well, if you guess 24, you're right? Because here you're taking test and then multiplying it by 2, and then you're getting some kind of result and adding it on to new test. But if we check test at this point, what do you think that is? Well, if you said 12, you're right, because we didn't modify 12. Just because we did some operation with it doesn't mean that we've changed the variable. This is the difference in this operator shorthand, right? It means that we do the operation, but also we assign that new value onto the variable. And lastly, we can do divide equals, and we can say, let's divide equals by 6. So we should get 2, perfect. And then lastly, you can also module and assign it to some number. So let's say test modulo equals 2, which at this point you should get 0. These are very useful when you want to take some kind of variable, do some kind of operation with it, and then get that result, rather than having to do something like test equals test and then +1, right? Because this technically works. This means now test, if I check now, you get 1, but this is a little redundant, right? We have to write test again, and basically what we're really interested is in this part, right? The +1 and equaling it to that thing and reassigning that, okay? So it's doing an operation and then reassigning our variable. These are very useful to keep in mind. And we will see many, many examples where we use these.